Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Vincent van Pelt. I'm from the Netherlands. I work for the National Health Care ICT Competence Center, NICTIS, and I'm also part of a project, a European project called eStandards. Can you all hear me now? That's better? Great. If you want to have a better vision, you can also come a bit more forward because it's maybe some of the details will be too small, but well, we'll see how this works. Yes, well, in Europe, the European community, there are many different projects. They all last for a couple of years and then they give over the stick to another project. But gradually, things have evolved and we're now at a point where we're looking at practical approaches, practical solutions, practical guidance on interoperability subjects. And I would like to give you a bit of the knowledge that we have gathered in this short presentation. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Please come forward. So first I will explain you a little bit about eStandards project. It's a project where the basic goals are to reinforce the bridges between Europe and across the pond in the EU-US Memorandum of Understanding. But we're also here to collect information, to collect knowledge and to collect experience from the different nations in the EU. And one of the things that we did was collect evidence, collect experiences from all these different countries and collect them together and afterwards make an analysis, an analysis of that. Well, you hear a lot about standards and which standards to use and which standards not to use. What we've done is we looked at practices and see how this went. If one follows a standard, it's very difficult often to get the end result. And for that we have given some guidance in the next slide. So, as it is written there, experiences from different countries have been gathered. The basic idea of the eStandards program is also to select use cases from these different nations and create them in a way that everybody can reuse the use cases. I'll go to the next one. First of all, if you talk about exchanging information and you use standards, it's not just a technical thing. You have to have alignment and agreements between different parties at different levels. And here's the eHealth network refined European Interoperability Framework, and this is the basis of that. It's a number of layers that you can identify in interoperability problems. To start with the legal and the regulatory, where you have to have legislation and how do you go about with the legislation, what is possible, what is not, and that's something that you have to have clear mind about. Second layer is the policy layer, where organizations make contracts between each other because they want to exchange information. You also have to have a basis and trust and governance of this information exchange. So that's another level. And then on the next level, you have the actual working ground. You have the processes, the healthcare processes that are going on between physicians and patients, and so forth. So those workflows are actually the basis for your use cases. So on that level, you can have many different descriptions, and you can really work up a body of knowledge there. During these care processes, you also have information exchange. A care process exists of a number of steps, so to speak, and each of these steps, information needs to be exchanged. And if you define what is to be exchanged, that is on the information layer, where you have data definitions, data sets, where you link these data sets to terminologies to give it an international possibility for translation. And so there you have the functional description of all the data elements that you want to have. Next, on the application level, you want to integrate this information between one system and the other, and for that you need communication standards. And here you should think of HL7 with CDA or with FHIR, which is the new kid on the block. And so that's where you integrate the information from one system to the other. And between the two systems, you have the network, the infrastructure, and also there you can have standards. And what this also explains is that you have standards on many different levels, and they are for different purposes. So somebody from my government asked a while ago, tell me just what kind of standard we need so then we can enforce this. But it's not just one standard. There are many standards and also implementations of standards that are needed for specific use cases. Okay. So it's not just a technical thing. You also need stakeholders, and they need to be aware of each other. People from governments, people from legislation, CEOs from hospitals, from healthcare organizations, they need to know what is going on. They need to be in alignment before you can actually get interoperability going. If you look at the third layer, where you have the care process, that's the start for most of the interoperability solutions. And a care process is something that you can describe in the form of use cases. And a use case describes a process and its steps. And you can define this in many different ways, but there are also templates for describing your use case, which can be very handy. We'll come to that later. But basically, a use case is a description of what needs to be done in a functional matter, not in a technical matter. So you don't say we need a dove pigeon, between two organizations, or we need a mail, or we need email, or we need, no, you just say information needs to go from A to B. So that's the use case. You define the problem, what needs to be done. And then you have realization scenarios, which provide a possible solution for that use case. So for one use case, you can have many different solutions. And it's up to you to decide which are the best. But not just up to you, it's also up to the people around you, the experience that has been gathered, and that can help you tremendously. So a realization scenario is how you do the process, how you arrange all the different standards and methods to work together in order to get information across from A to B. And, well, what are the use cases? You can have many different use cases, but if you start with the basic ones that are very often used, like medication, discharge letters, diagnostic studies, multidisciplinary working together, that's all use cases that you can use. And, well, this is not something that is only in Greece, it's something that goes on all around the world. And for that, already there are use cases defined that you can use. When we come to that. I think I'll leave this one for the time, but of course you can read this. It's a short overview. This presentation and all the others will be, you don't have to make all the pictures. You get the presentation themselves as well. Just very short, hope you can follow me. If you look at the different processes, you can describe them as use cases. That's the top one. And there, in these process steps, you have to exchange information. And then you have to define the information elements, you know, what is to be transported. And then if you have defined them, you link them to terminologies, right? That's the fourth one. And then you package this information in communication standards. That's the message or the document that you use to transport information. Preferably you use reusable information blocks, so you don't define every different message as separate, but you look at things that are the same and that recur, and that is something that you can reuse. Profiles. they are used to define what exactly has to be transported from A to B. If you have the same data definition, but you only need the last 3 results of a laboratory, then you can define that in your profiles. And the infrastructure, that is what you use to get information across. Whether it is a pull system or a push system, you need to cater for both. So now we come to some of the key, I just picked some of the key recommendations or messages that we have gathered from the e-standards because it's a very large body of work and there are many, many other recommendations, but these are just a few of them to give you an idea. First of all, as I already mentioned, you look at all the interoperability levels, not just at the data, not just at the transport, you look at the whole spectrum because otherwise your project will not succeed. You need all the different layers in order to get information across. Looking at the care processes, you start small. You don't think, oh, how are we going to revolutionize the world? You just start with small use cases and see if it works. In practice, it works best. And for that you need those clearly defined use cases. If you want to use use cases, it is best if you have one standard template to exchange these use cases and realization scenarios. And that is something that has been done in the Antilope project. So we have devised a template for the description of use cases and realization scenarios, and that was also adopted by the eHealth network as one of their assets. One thing I will also say in some of the other bullets is that you should not try to reinvent the wheel. Of course, you may, but it is much more handy if you reuse what is already done in other countries by other parties and see whether this fits your purpose or whether you need to tweak them a little bit. But basically, they have a very broad background. Often there's years of work in those efforts. So reuse the use cases that have been written and see whether this fits your case. Another, just a small message is that what type of standards you are selecting depends on the use case, depends on the parties that want to exchange information. If everybody uses a certain standard but it's a little bit old, then use it until you have found a good reason to change for the new possibilities. Yes, I think that's it. On the information level, please use tools that already have a large body of content. There's one tool that's often used in many different countries called Art Decor. And there you will find not just a tool for your own definitions, but you can also find a lot of different definitions that already are out there. You can use them as such, or you can use them for inspiration. On the application level, make sure that people can really put the software to work and give them enough handles or tools so that they can implement. If you just give them a standard, they will have a very hard problem getting it done. So you need an implementation guide that says exactly how they should program their software. That helps the vendors and that helps you. And also there, use what is already out there. Use existing standards and profiles and go on from there. For the IT infrastructure, look for standardized solutions. IHE is one of them, integrating the healthcare enterprise, where they have cross-enterprise document sharing, XDS, as one of their profiles for implementation of an infrastructure, where you can exchange information. And, well, that is an example of where you can actually look at the profiles that are there and use them. And there are many vendors that already have implemented these standards. So you can just buy them off the shelf. And try, in general, to look for the most international solutions. That's the goal. If it has to be a national extension of that, that's also okay. But try to reach for the highest level. I'll leave this one. Here's, I'll give you some more examples because I think my time is already almost finished. 2 more minutes, that's enough, mate. Okay, this is an example of, just very simple, but it's just an example of a template for the description of use cases and realization scenarios. A title, what is it for, what is the relevance, in which domain does this use case live, what is the scale, is it local, is it regional, is it national, is it international, what is the context, what kind of information is being transported, etc. So at the end of this slideshow there are a lot of links, or some links I should say, and some of them they point directly to these assets from the eHealth network. Here's here are some snapshots from the Art Decor tool, where you have on the left side the international projects. You can see Germany, Italy, Switzerland. Germany is again, Elgas from Austria, Swiss. So there are many different countries who use Art Decor for the description of their data sets. And on the right-hand side, we have the Dutch clinical building blocks, as we call it. There are about 100 of these different building blocks. They're like the smallest bits of information that you can exchange. And we build all our messaging and all our documents on top of these building blocks. So you don't have loose things. You have generalized, generally usable bits of information that you can just, like Lego blocks, you can just put them in one document and that's it. So you always have the same structure, you have the same information. And this is a work of all the academic hospitals in the Netherlands. They've been working on this for 4 years, so that's really a large body of work. Already it has been, this set has been adopted by the Belgian government, so, and almost without any changes. So that's really nice. Here's an example of a use case repository. So if you're looking for a use case on the European scale or on the national scale, go to this website, which is at the end of the slideshow. And here you have a use case repository where you can just click on one and you see all the details that are in there. So here are the useful links. And eStanders and Antilope are those 2 European projects. There's a lot of information there. So if you want to go straight for what is the nitty-gritty, then you should look at Art Decor, the eHealth network assets, and a use case repository that I just showed. There's also a guide to interoperability between XDS affinity domains. That's a cookbook for implementing XDS infrastructures. It's very basic, but it looks at all the different levels of interoperability and writes down specifications of how you should do that. Because if you have 2 XDS networks, you have to have a lot of alignment between them. And that is the cookbook. And on the right-hand side, some of the standards that are being used. Well, on that note, I thank you.